They told me it was an upgrade, but the cabin they gave me felt like a punishment. It looked ordinary enough. Clean sheets, folded towels, the faint smell of lemon polish. But from the moment I stepped inside, something about it whispered wrong. The air was heavy, damp, and the porthole glass was streaked from the inside, as if someone had pressed wet hands against it, desperate to get out. At first I told myself I was imagining it, that the sea was playing tricks on me. But by the third night, when I awoke to find a dripping woman standing at the foot of my bed, watching me breathe, I knew this cabin wasn't mine, that it was hers. It started at the check-in counter. The clerk looked up at me, smile plastered in place, and said, "Sir, we've made a complimentary adjustment to your reservation. You've been moved to cabin B214. Larger porthole, midship stability, less engine noise. I'm sure you'll enjoy it." Most people would have thanked her. I hesitated. My original cabin was fine. Small? Yes, but comfortable. Still, the promise of more space was tempting. I slid the new key card into my pocket and boarded. B-214 was 3 decks lower, tucked into a quieter hallway, near the end where foot traffic was light. I remember the way the carpet muted my steps as I walked down, the overhead lights flickering slightly as if they hadn't been replaced in a while. When I swiped the key, the lock gave a mechanical click. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. AHEAVINESS. Not the kind of stale air that comes from a closed room. Something else. Like stepping into a place where the air had memory. The walls seemed damp. The faintest scent of brine clung to the curtains. And though the sheets were folded tight, they looked as if someone had only just climbed out of them. I stood by the bed, suitcase in hand, listening. Ships always hum the constant thrum of engines, the faint vibration of machinery, but in here, the silence was deeper. Like the cabin was cut off from the rest of the vessel. I told myself I was being dramatic, that travel nerves make shadows seem alive. I set my bag down, pulled the curtains tight, and convinced myself it was just another room. But even as I lay on the mattress that first night, I felt the dampness soaking through the sheets. I didn't sleep. The first hour was restless tossing. The second was staring at the ceiling, and by the third, I realized my body wasn't going to let me drift off. That's when I heard it. The drip. At first I thought it was from the bathroom. I got up, checked the sink, the shower head. Dry. I pressed my ear to the wall. The drip was faint but constant, like water falling from a great distance, echoing inside the metal bones of the ship. I crawled back under the blanket. That's when the bed shuddered. Not a vibration from the ship's movement. A shift, as though the mattress had adjusted to accommodate a second weight. My breathing caught. I told myself it was nothing, just my nerves, just exhaustion. But at exactly 3:07 a.m., my eyes snapped open. Someone was standing at the foot of my bed. She wasn't solid. Her body shimmered faintly, her outline dripping as if made of water. Her hair clung to her face in wet ropes, clothes plastered to her body like seaweed. The smell hit me next. Salt, rot, and something metallic, like rust. Her head tilted once, sharply, like a broken doll. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just lay there, every muscle locked. As she leaned closer, her mouth opened. No sound came out, just a stream of water trickling down her chin, soaking the carpet. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The room was empty, but when I looked down, the sheets at the foot of the bed were soaked. Morning light made me feel foolish. Ghosts weren't real. Hallucinations? Maybe. Fatigue? Maybe. I went to breakfast, trying to convince myself it had been a nightmare. The steward smiled, polite as ever, when I asked if he knew anything about cabin B214, but his smile faltered. Only for a second. Many guests stay there, he said quickly. People come and go. His eyes slid away. He left before I could press further. That day, I tried to distract myself. Shore excursion, whale watching, photographs. The ocean was calm, the air crisp, everyone smiling. But every time I thought of returning to my cabin, a knot twisted in my stomach. Still, I told myself, tonight would be different. I'd sleep with the lights on. I'd drink enough wine to knock myself out. I'd prove the room was just a room. But that night, the noises began. Knocking from inside the walls, slow, deliberate knocks, like someone rapping their knuckles from the other side of the metal. Then the groan of the porthole, as if something heavy leaned against it from outside. At 2:46 a.m., she came back. This time, not at the foot of the bed. She was beside me, leaning close, her hair brushing my shoulder. Her breath was cold water against my ear. Her mouth opened as though to whisper, and though no words came out, I felt something flood my chest, thick and heavy, like I was drowning in my own lungs. I tore myself awake with a gasp. The fruit bowl on the desk had toppled. Apples and bananas rolled across the carpet, wet. On the third morning, I couldn't take it. I marched down to guest services and slammed my key card on the desk. I want a new cabin. The clerk didn't even ask why. She looked at the room number, winced, and tapped at her keyboard. Within 5 minutes, I had a new key. No explanation, no apology, just relief. When I packed, I glanced back at the bed one last time. The sheets were already rumpled, though I hadn't slept in them since dawn, as if someone else had been lying there, waiting. Later that day, in the atrium, I overheard 2 crew members whispering by the service elevator. Another one moved out of B214. One asked. The other shrugged. Always happens. Ever since that woman drowned on the first voyage, when they saw me listening, they walked away. I thought I'd left it behind. My new cabin was dry, warm, and blissfully ordinary. I slept soundly the first night, comforted by distance, but the ship has a way of carrying things with you. On the final day, I returned from dinner to find the door of my new cabin unlocked. I knew I'd latched it. Inside, everything looked untouched. My bag in the corner, my bed neatly made, but on the desk, sitting where the fruit bowl used to be, was my key card for B-214. Dripping. A thin puddle of seawater spread beneath it. When we docked, that practically ran off the ship. The staff didn't stop me. Nobody asked why my luggage smelled faintly of salt. At home, I unpacked in relief, but when I pulled my suitcase from the closet a week later, one shirt was still damp. The same one I'd worn the night she stood at the foot of my bed, and worse, tucked in the side pocket of my bag. Folded carefully, was a napkin from the ship's dining room. The edges curled, water-stained. Written in faint, smeared ink were the words, "B214 is mine." Sometimes, late at night, I wake to the sound of dripping. My apartment is dry, my faucets are tight, but still, I hear a drip, 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 and my chest feels heavy. Like lungs pulling in water, I close my eyes, and I see her standing there again, tilting her head in that sharp, broken motion, hair clinging to her face, and I wonder if I ever really left cabin B-214. Or if I just brought it home with me. Glaciers aren't supposed to speak. They crack, they groan, they collapse into the sea. Yes, but they don't whisper, they don't pray, they don't laugh. At least, that's what I thought. On the 5th day of our Alaskan voyage, when the ship slowed before a massive wall of blue ice, I learned different. I learned that glaciers can speak hundreds of voices woven together, murmuring across the water, and once you hear them, you realize something terrible. They're not speaking to you, they're speaking from inside. We'd been at sea long enough that the ship felt normal, almost safe. Cabins, buffets, shows in the theater, the kind of distractions that make you forget you're floating in black. Freezing water miles from shore. That morning, the announcement came, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching the Harrow Strait Glacier, one of the largest in Alaska. Please make your way to the observation decks for once-in-a-lifetime views." People poured outside, scarves, hats, cameras clicking before we were even close. The air was sharp, cutting, a cold that sank through clothes and into bone. And then we saw it. A sheer wall of ice rising from the sea. Blue, white, translucent, carved into jagged peaks by centuries of wind and water. It was bigger than anything I'd ever seen, dwarfing the ship itself. A frozen cliff stretching endlessly across the horizon. The guides began their lectures. Thousands of years locked inside. Layers of snow compressed into glassy ice. A living history of the planet. But as the crowd listened, I noticed something else. The sound at first it was easy to dismiss. Just wind rolling down the glacier's face. A low howl echoing across the water. Natural, beautiful. But the longer I listened, the less natural it felt. The sound shifted, like a radio dial sliding between stations. Not a howl, not a groan. Whispers. Layered. Dozens, then hundreds. Passengers fell silent one by one. Conversations dying midst. Children stopped fidgeting. Parents tightened their arms around them. It wasn't just noise, it was voices. Not in one language either. Some sounded like prayers, low and solemn. Others like laughter muffled through ice. Others pleading, sharp, desperate. I strained to hear, certain my ears were playing tricks. But the longer I listened, the more distinct the whispers became. Words I didn't know but felt in my chest. Words that didn't belong to the living. The crew moved quickly, sensing the unease. "Just acoustics," one guide said loudly. "Wind through the glacier. Happens all the time." But his voice wavered, betraying him. Passengers raised phones and cameras. Recordings came back empty, just static. No whispers, no voices. That it was as if the sound refused to be captured. I looked around. Dozens of faces, pale and confused. all listening to the same impossible thing. No one wanted to be the first to admit what they were hearing, but in their eyes, I saw it. Terror disguised as awe. That night, the ship didn't rest. I woke 3 times, gasping, heart racing, each time from the same dream. I was standing inside the glacier, ice walls pressed tight around me, their surfaces faintly glowing with trapped light. My arms wouldn't move. My legs were frozen into the floor, and everywhere, voices whispering in my ears, pressing against my skull. Some laughed, some cried, some begged out I couldn't breathe. My chest filled with frost, lungs turning brittle, my throat burned with ice. And then, faces. They pushed against the frozen walls, mouths wide, eyes straining. They were inside the glacier, looking out, trying to reach me. Their lips moved, forming words I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. They wanted out. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat, my throat raw as if I'd been choking. I wasn't alone. All over the ship, passengers whispered about the same dream. Standing inside the glacier, choking on ice, faces pressing from the walls. One woman screamed awake, clawing at her throat until her palms bled. The next morning, a small documentary crew who'd been filming the voyage set up in the atrium. They looked pale, shaken, huddled around a laptop. Word spread quickly. Their footage near the glacier had been corrupted. Entire reels, unusable colors, bleeding into static, frames warping, audio replaced by screeches of distortion. Except for one stretch. Just a few seconds, they froze the video and replayed it over and over. In the glacier's face, just beneath the translucent surface, were human faces, not shadows, not tricks of the light, mouths open, eyes wide, frozen mid-scream. The images weren't clear enough to identify, but they weren't illusions. They weren't random. Each face strained forward, desperate, pleading. The room fell silent, and then, just as quickly, the crew shut the laptop, muttering about pareidolia, an illusion of light and shadow. But we'd seen we all had. Later that afternoon, someone asked the captain during a Q&A, a brave man, his voice trembling but steady, "What about the glacier? What about the whispers?" The captain's face tightened. He glanced at his officers, then forced a smile. "Pareidolia," he said. "Your minds play tricks. Natural acoustics, nothing more." His voice carried authority, but his eyes betrayed fear. After that, staff refused to answer questions. Crew members avoided eye contact. The incident was stricken from the itinerary, as if it had never happened, but the passengers knew. We knew what we'd heard, what we'd dreamed, what we'd seen on that corrupted footage. The glacier wasn't just ice. It wasn't just a monument of frozen time. It was a graveyard, a prison, a wall holding back voices that had been trapped for centuries. Voices still alive, still whispering, waiting for anyone who dared to listen. I wish I could say it ended when the ship pulled away, that the glacier shrank into the distance and the whispers went with it. But even now, weeks later, I hear them. At night, when my apartment is still, I hear faint layers of voices pressing through the walls. My dreams are filled with ice, lungs filling with frost, faces straining behind translucent glass. Sometimes, when I play back videos on my phone, the audio skips. Static bursts, distortion flares. And for a second, beneath it, I hear whispers. Always whispers. The glacier isn't silent. It never was. It's speaking. Still, and I think it's calling me back. Cruise ships don't just stop. They keep their promises with diesel and discipline, sliding through black water like cities that forgot how to sleep. But on the 4th night of our voyage, no port in sight, no land on the itinerary. The engines died at 12:03 a.m. The decks flared white, and searchlights clawed the Alaskan Gulf. When we saw the lifeboat drifting toward us, not ours, not recent. And inside it, bodies dressed for a century that shouldn't have reached us at all. I woke to a silence that felt wrong in my bones. If you've ever slept on a big ship, you know its lullaby. The steady hum in the walls, the low vibration under the mattress, air handling like a distant tide. Kill all that, and even your pulse sounds like an intrusion. My clock said 12:03. The cabin had that gentle sway you don't notice until you're looking for something to blame. I cracked the curtains. No harbor, no shoreline, just a plate of moonless water and wind heaping small shoulders on the waves. Then the floodlights came on bright, surgical, throwing the railings into hard black lines. Search beams swept slow arcs like someone reading the dark. A shape answered. At first a log, then curved planks, a chewed bow, ribs of wood, a lifeboat, the old kind. Low, blunt, the paint chalked to a ghost of its original color. It didn't bob right. The swells should have bullied it. Instead, it slid toward us as if the current had been given an order. Doors opened along the deck above me. People in hoodies and hotel slippers leaned into the cold. Crew appeared with coil after coil of rope, metal hooks flashing in the light. Orders cracked across the wind. The little boat tapped our hull with a polite toke that made my stomach drop. They hauled it up in a slung cradle, water weeping from the seams like memory. The searchlights pinned it open. Every conversation on deck went silent in the same second. Bodies. Not bones. Not rags with rumors inside. Men and women preserved by cold and time until their skin had the waxy knot color of a candle handled too much. Beards stiff with frost. Lace collars filmed pale. Wool coats swollen and dull. Hands clenched around small chosen things. A rosary. A coin on a ribbon. A child's wooden toy, salt cracked and smooth. Their eyes were open. A woman's bonnet had a sugar-white rim of ice. A man's lips were parted as if a last word had stuck there and frozen. Someone gasped near me. He breathed, and others swore they saw a thread of vapor leave a mouth and vanish in the light. Maybe we needed to believe that. I don't know. I know crew dropped a blue tarp with practiced speed and the world resumed. Officers appeared with megaphones and faces meant to carry orders. Please return inside. For your safety. Back inside, please. People didn't move until one person did. Then the herd went. Slow, shaken, narrating to themselves to make it less real. I stayed a beat too long, eyes glued to the square of tarp that had caught on a boot sole and bellied. With the ship's small sway, a crewman made eye contact. One tight shake of the head, less command than plea. I went in. In the glass door, my reflection floated over the white slab of deck and the blue, ugly promise of the tarp. I shut the door, and the warmth hit me with the guilt of it. Guest services was already a slow-moving storm. That cruise ship queue, polite faces, tight voices, patience, fraying in tasteful stages. Good morning, the agent said, when my turn came, as if morning hadn't been abducted. Ella glinted on her badge. We stopped at 12:03. I said, why? She kept her eyes on mine the way training teaches. According to the bridge, sir, we did not stop. You lit the decks like noon and hauled in a wooden lifeboat. Our official operations log shows normal passage. Can I see it? Bridge documents aren't available to guests. She typed something that could have been a grocery list. If you have concerns about safety, please know our officers train. Whose boat was it? I asked. Her smile brightened to the border. Is there anything else I can help you with today? The truth, I said, and her eyes flinched small, quick. Human before the smile sealed it shut. Deck 5 wraps the ship like a promise. I walked it because the motion made my thoughts agree to a truce. At the stern, the wind pressed my coat to me like a hand. Near a service door on starboard aft, the air changed. Cellar cold, briny, the faint sweetness of wet wood long starved of sun. The door paint was scuffed where carts kissed it. I touched the metal. It held the kind of cold that feels borrowed. A young crewman slid into the space between me and the door. The way habit becomes reflex. Guests aren't permitted here, sir. Not Rutfino. What's behind it? Storage. Of what? Things we store. Almost a smile. The door opened behind him. Two crew pushed a cart under a blue tarp. The tarp sagged under weight, its corner lifting to show a wet plank with old slat marks and a glint of something like a brass bolt. Sir, the crewman repeated, and the word carried tired authority. I stepped back. Something clicked on the deck by my shoe. A small black bead. I picked it up. My thumb found a tiny cross molded there. Rosary bead, old worn slick. I slid it into my pocket without thinking and felt immediately like a thief. At the cafe, a man with a brick of a phone case pinched and zoomed on glare, searchlights, blown whites, ghosts of figures leaning in. Their breath, he insisted. There's no breath at this temperature, his wife murmured, not looking up. In the library, a grandmother did a puzzle while a child in a whale hat cried without pause. On a corridor wall, someone taped a paper. What happened last night? People wrote under it in pencil, so housekeeping wouldn't have to scrub drill bodies. I saw eyes. Near the stern, a fisherman showed me his palms. The skin over the knuckles was fissured into clean white lines. Woke like this, he said. Didn't touch ice. Freezer burn. Maybe, his wife offered. He shook his head. Quiet. Feels like something held on. We were all building. Stories from splinters because the official one refused to exist. At Fort, the theater hosted a Q&A. The captain stood with a cruise-ready smile, the kind that calms 17 types of panic. We experienced no interruption to our schedule, he said. No deviation from safe operation. Hands went up. We saw the searchlights. A woman called. We saw a boat. In these waters, we perform visual checks for hazards. Ice, driftwood, debris. What about the boaties? A man shouted, brutalizing the room with the word. There were no bodies, the captain said, and something thin in his voice hummed. The cruise director slid in ports. Whales? Trivia. The microphone complied. We filed out in murmuring clumps. At the back, an officer stood hands clasped, watching us with the patient stare of someone assigned to shepherd denial. I tried to sleep early, shower TV, murmuring a beach commercial. Blanket pulled to my chin like I'd agreed to be small. At 12:03, my eyes opened without my permission. The room was dark except for the seam of cold light at the curtain's edge. A sound threaded the wall. Canvas sliding over wood. Rope giving a small, tired sigh. A dull toke, like a boat nudging a hull. I went to the balcony. The sea below was black felt. No beams. No crew. just the careful noises of a giant thing trying to pretend it's gentle. Inside, on the desk, the day's schedule lay where I'd dropped it. Under it, something that hadn't been there. A square of fabric. I unfolded it. A handkerchief, fine linen, edges hemmed with old-fashioned care, initials stitched in fading thread. HW, one corner stained with a translucent ring like the ghost of a wet coin. The latch on my door was still thrown, the housekeeping seal unbroken. I put the hanky in the open felt, like hiding if I didn't. I slept late. In a shallow rope-heavy dream. In the morning I went to the library and asked for shipwreck histories. The librarian polite steady pulled vanished vessels of the North Pacific. The book smelled like old glue and salt. 1913. Cargo steamer Harrow Bridge reported a lifeboat south of the Kenai Peninsula. 8 persons apparently deceased. Heavy weather prevented retrieval. Vessel sounded 3 long blasts and proceeded. No names. No follow-up. The ocean prefers clean margins. Harrow. We'd sailed past Harrow Strait Glacier on day 2, guides giddy with facts. I copied the paragraph with a library pencil on a scrap receipt. When I looked up, the librarian was watching me with a regretful sort of empathy. "You're not the first to ask," she said softly, then remembered her job and looked away. By afternoon, a rumor sprinted someone had video. In the aft lounge, a man named Harris opened a laptop. Night vision green washed the screen. Crew leaning in. The boat, a comma of shadow. Resolution turned to confetti when he zoomed, but the posture of the men said enough. "I'll post it when we dock," he said. Righteous. Security materialized in the polite shape of a man you'd forget in an hour. He smiled, asked to speak, led Harris a few steps away. Spoke with professional softness. Harris came back, jaw tight, closed the laptop. "They asked nicely," he said. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. That evening, the ship's app updated. 0:20:10, unscheduled safety verification, no guest impact. A sentence wearing a mask. Dinner service tried to be cheerful. My waiter, usually generous with practiced jokes, delivered plates like offerings and left before small talk could start. "Were you on last night?" I asked, when he set coffee. "Always," he said, which was both true and not. He adjusted my knife to a company-approved angle. When I asked what he'd seen, he looked at my fork and said, "I see what I'm told," then left, shoulders a little higher than before. On the promenade, a woman I'd noticed all week, book, parka, sun hat at breakfast, fell into step beside me. "You were near the stern door," she said, as if we'd already been speaking. "You've seen it open." She smiled with half her mouth. "I've seen it close," she said, and kept walking. We docked the next morning with the choreography of cranes and vans. The woman at the scanner smiled. The screen reflected in her eyes flipped my name to departed. The word felt too decisive. Home is supposed to dilute things. Laundry, emails, a kettle's small routine. But some nights I wake at 12:03 and wait for a sound a building shouldn't make. Rope sigh, canvas slide. Wood tapping steel from a century away. I opened my phone to show a friend the glacier and found a new image. I hadn't taken a close view of wet plank. A blue tarp corner. A bead of water, fat as an eye. Timestamp 12:03 a.m. not from the cruise dates, but from the year the Harrow Bridge line listed in the book. I deleted it. It returned the next day. I stopped trying. The rosary bead in my pocket worries, a groove in my jeans, then in my thoughts. I've tried to throw it away and found it again on my kitchen table, warm as a living palm can make it. I run a fan now at night, not for air, for the noise. A counterfeit ship hum to keep the true sounds from getting in. Sometimes I succeed. Sometimes I stand in the dark with the curtain cracked and the black outside looks like water, even though I'm 6 floors up in a city that owes the ocean nothing. When I can't stand it, I open vanished vessels and read names until they blur. Perseverance, Bellwether, Ellen May. The index ends. The ocean's doesn't. It returns things on its own schedule. 2 addresses it chooses. Cruise ships don't just stop, but sometimes the sea taps a hull and we answer. And then we call it a drill so breakfast won't be awkward. If your room tilts at 12:03 and you hear a soft toke against steel and smell cellar salt where drywall should smell like paint, don't go to the window. Don't open your door. Don't accept compliments if the captain slid under your latch. And if you do, look and see nothing, you'll be tempted to laugh, to say glitch, to boil water for tea. Just check your table in the morning. If there's a faint ring of salt there, the size a coin makes when left on wet wood, you'll know what I know. We didn't rescue a lifeboat. We signed for a delivery the sea was always going to make. Cruise ships don't just heat up in the middle of the night. If there's a fire on board, you'd hear the alarms, the sprint of crew boots, the hiss of sprinklers. But at 2:07 a.m., on the 3rd night of my Alaska voyage, none of that happened. Instead, I awoke to a glow bleeding through the edge of my curtain. I thought it was dawn. When I pulled the fabric aside, the breath left my body, because outside my window, the black ocean itself was on fire, columns of flame rising from the waves, burning silently, as if sound had been erased. I hadn't planned to be awake. The ship's hum usually carried me into heavy sleep, that strange half-rest that only comes when you're surrounded by water on every side. But what woke me wasn't sound, it was temperature. The cabin air felt thicker, warmer, as though someone had turned up the heat without asking. My skin prickled. I sat up, annoyed, ready to curse the air system. That's when I saw it. An orange smear of light leaking around the curtain edges. Too bright. Too early. I padded over, tugged the fabric aside, and froze. The sea was aflame, not with oil slicks or scattered sparks. No, these were tall, steady columns of fire, leaping skyward in twisting spirals, painting the waves red and gold. And stranger still, the flames made no sound, no crackle, no roar. Only the muffled thrum of the ship beneath my feet. My palm touched the glass. It was warm. The walls of my cabin sweated condensation. The ocean was burning. And somehow, I was the only one awake to see it. Instinct shoved me to the phone. I jabbed the front desk button. Static. Not dead air. Not ringing. Just a thick wall of white hiss. I tried again. Same result. I flipped to the security line. Static. I grabbed my cell. No service. No clock update. The screen glitched, flickering like it wanted to reset. Fine. I'd wake the hallway. I yanked open my cabin door. The corridor stretched empty and silent. Carpet soft. Lights low. A dessert tray sat outside someone's room. Half a cake still on its plate. No smoke. No alarms. I hurried back to the window, praying I'd hallucinated. But the fire was still there, roaring silently, flames bending without wind. Looking at the horizon. Something about the way it moved unsettled me most. It didn't spread like fire. It drew lines across the water, slow and deliberate, like handwriting. The door across from mine cracked open. A man in his 40s, robe, socks, sleep-heavy eyes. He squinted at me. "You good?" he muttered. "Look outside," I urged. "The water." He shuffled into my cabin, glanced at the glass, and frowned. "I don't see anything," he said flatly. "What? Look, flames, deck lights, reflection. Maybe." He gave me that polite half-shrug strangers give when they don't want to argue. "Go back to sleep." And then he was gone, shutting himself back into his bubble of ignorance. I turned back. The ocean still burned. The heat still pressed against the window, so why couldn't he see it? I couldn't stay alone. I threw on jeans, boots, and a sweater, and headed for the upper decks. By the time I reached deck 11, the flames were impossible to deny. They danced in long bands across the water, some stretching hundreds of feet, others rising like towers. A small group had gathered at the rails. 5, maybe 6 passengers. Their faces were pale, eyes wide. Good, at least I wasn't insane. One woman whimpered, clutching her husband's arm. "It's not possible," she whispered. Another man raised his phone to record. His screen showed only black. The fire closest to the hull reached upward, brushing the steel with a delicate curve. The ship groaned underfoot. Heat rolled over us in a silent wave. That's when a crewman appeared. Young, stiff uniform, radio in hand. He froze when he saw it, just for a heartbeat, then forced his mask of professionalism. "Back on, please. Return inside," he said firmly. "It's too cold out." "Cold," I snapped. "It's boiling out here." He didn't answer, just raised his radio. "Security 211, starboard. Possible anomaly." We stayed out there until dawn. The fire didn't move like a blaze. It held steady, circling the ship, as if examining us. Now and then, a filament of flame would trace itself along the hull, leaving behind a faint orange glow that cooled into black. "Tar-like streaks." One man whispered prayers. The crying woman knelt, rocking. I couldn't look away. I kept thinking, fire needs fuel. Fire needs air. How does flame stand on water? At 5:01 a.m., the glow began to thin. Not extinguish, just fade, like ink diluted with water. Columns folded inward. The sea swallowed the last embers, and then it was gone. The world snapped back to normal. Gulls cried overhead. The cold bit deep again. But along the steel where the flames had touched, we saw the truth. Curved black streaks etched into the hull, like claw marks carved by something massive. By breakfast, the story spread faster than coffee. People whispered at tables, pointed at streaks on deck 5, swapped shaky theories. Crew brushed it all off. Routine maintenance, external corrosion, perfectly normal. But the marks were too precise, too deliberate. I touched one myself, still faintly warm, even in morning chill. At noon, the captain made his announcement. His voice was calm, polished. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Some guests may have noticed engineering activity overnight. This was standard maintenance. Seas calm today. Winds light, please. Enjoy your voyage." Not a word about fire. Not a word about marks. Passengers exchanged looks, quiet disbelief. Nobody bought it. Everyone tried for proof. Phones showed black screens where flames should have been. Cameras glitched, photos warped. A man swore he captured a clear video until security politely asked him to delete it. The only image I kept was a single still, the ship's railing at night. And in the corner, a thin orange thread clinging to the hull. Zoom in, and it pixelated into nothing. But I knew. I'd felt the heat. I'd heard the steel groan under fire. Proof didn't matter. The ship had already decided to bury it. I tried to sleep early the next night. Curtains opened out at 2:07 a.m. The room grew warm again. This time, I didn't move. Didn't reach for the window. Didn't answer the phone when it rang. Caller ID flashing front desk. I just sat there, staring at the glass. refusing to confirm what I already knew was outside. A sound came through the wall like a faint tap of wood against steel, then silence. When I finally slept, my dreams were orange. We docked 2 days later. The hull had been scrubbed, but traces remained curved scars the color of ash. Reporters weren't there. No Coast Guard inspections. Just a normal port day like nothing had happened. But in the terminal, I overheard 2 engineers whispering. "Doesn't make sense." One said, "Doesn't have to." The other replied, "As long as it's logged as corrosion." At home, I tried to put it behind me, but sometimes, at 2:07 a.m., the apartment grew warmer by 1 sharp degree. I'd check the window. The city outside would look normal, but on my desk, my coffee mug would leave a perfect ring of moisture on wood even if it was empty. A ring shaped exactly, like the black scorch marks etched into the ship's hull. If a cruise ship floods, you hear it. Alarms. Footsteps pounding metal stairs. The slosh slap of water where it doesn't belong. But on our 6th night in the Alaskan Gulf, none of that happened. No sirens, no crew sprinting, just a sound you only notice when you're already awake, the soft, patient, lapping beneath the floor. As if the ocean had found a way into the seams of the ship and was tasting the carpet from below. At 1:14 a.m., someone screamed down the hall. When I opened my door, the corridor was bone dry. And when I shut it and opened it again, it wasn't. By then, none of us were sleeping well. The ship groaned differently in cold water. Pipes rattled. Metal sang. Explanations came easy. But that night, the sounds had changed. Not mechanical, organic, a lycandrol of liquid under my floor, like someone dragging a hand along the underside. I pressed my ear to the carpet. Faint slosh. My stomach tightened. Then a woman screamed down the hall. Not startled, not playful. A scream born from belief. I opened my door. The corridor stretched silent and dry. Carpet neat. A food tray with a half-eaten tart. A door slammed far away. I shut the door. Opened it again. Cold water surged around my ankles. The hall was a canal. Clear seawater rose to my shins, carrying reflections of lights overhead. The ship stayed level. No alarms, no tilt. Then came the bodies. A woman drifted by, hair spreading in a dark halo, eyes cloudy but wide, her lips parted in an eternal gasp. Behind her, a man in a black suit slid past, body undone, mouth frozen in the shape of an O. They didn't thrash. They didn't reach. They just drifted. Watching, I stumbled back, slammed my door, hard hammering. The latch clicked when I opened it again. The hall was dry, but on the carpet lay 2 wet boot prints, darkening the fibers before fading away. By morning, the whispers began. A woman near the coffee station murmured, "Up to my ankles," and faces watching me. A man in a cap corrected her. "No, my knees." Crew brushed it off. Dreams are vivid at sea. Pipes sound strange and cold. Hull carpet springy by design, but I saw the look in other passengers' eyes, relief that someone else had said it first. I found Harris, a retired engineer, in the library. He leaned over a Rex book. "You heard it?" I asked. "Saw it. Deck 8 forward. Filmed it." He held up his phone. The video was pure black, just his panicked breathing. They added a line to the log. He said, "He showed me. Night noise investigation." Logs lied. Water didn't. By afternoon, theories blossomed like mold. One man swore our route crossed a wreck site from the 1930s. Hundreds drowned, never recovered. "Cold keeps them," he said. Another claimed it wasn't one wreck, it was the ocean itself reclaiming debts. I didn't argue. I'd touched one of the black stains that had appeared on the hull near deck 5, long, curved streaks like wet hands dragged down steel. My palm came away salty. Whatever this was, it was leaving marks. That night, I tried to prepare. I jammed a towel under the door, slept dressed out at 1:03 a.m., my mattress tipped, gently lifted as if floating on hidden water, then dashed drip onto my cheek. I touched the ceiling, dry, tasted my hand, salt. Footsteps shuffled inside the wall, slow, dragging, waterlogged. They stopped at my door. The towel darkened, soaking from underneath. I whispered, "No." The footsteps paused, then moved on. At 1:14, another scream tore the silence. I opened my door. The hall had transformed again. Water mid-calf, cold enough to numb. 2 figures drifted hand in hand. A man in an ancient tuxedo, a woman in tattered silk, both staring, mouths fixed in that same open gasp. Behind them, more. A child with a red beret, hair floating like seaweed. A tourist in a modern hoodie. A woman in rags from another century. All drifting, all watching. One hand brushed mine. Cold, solid, real. I yanked back into my cabin. In the blink of an eye, the water was gone. Carpet dry. Only my wet footprints remained, stopping 3 feet from the door. By morning, the app delivered its verdict. Dreams caused by motion. Please hydrate. At guest services, I overheard the woman who had screamed, "Bodies in the hall," she insisted. The agent smiled. No bodies reported. Her patience broke. "You didn't look." She turned, caught my eye, and nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. Later, I cornered a housekeeper. She whispered. I heard the footsteps. Then she pushed her cart away, like the truth had burned her. On our final night, calm seas spread like polished stone. I propped my door on its latch, chair against it, towel folded. At 1:14, the mattress lifted again. The cold climbed the walls. Drips salted my skin. And then the footsteps. Sloshing, steady, stopping at my door. Dark shapes pressed against the seam. Faces leaned close. Pale, wide-eyed, mouths open. The child with the beret, the tuxedo man, the woman in silk. The latch shuddered, but held. The chair trembled. They waited, listening. Then, slowly, they receded. When silence returned, I opened the door, dry, of course. But on the carpet, right at my threshold, were two small wet footprints, bare a child's. We docked under a bright sky that pretended nothing had happened. The captain's final announcement was cheerful, practiced. Crew smiled as if their teeth had never seen salt. At the airport, the photographer from the lounge showed me his phone. A picture of a hallway that morning, dry, yellow cleaning sign, standing. And in the middle, one faint wet footprint, small, turning toward a cabin door. He slid the phone away. I won't post it, he said. It doesn't help. Where does it belong then? I asked. In the water, he said. Back home, my apartment doesn't sway. My walls don't drip. But some nights at 1:14, my mattress lifts. Just a breath. I wake with salt on my cheek. I keep a towel at my door, though I know it doesn't work. And sometimes, when I open the door, I half expect to see them waiting, drifting in ankle-deep water, faces pressed close, mouths open in that eternal gasp. Because the dead wake. And they don't always drift past. Cruise ships don't just erase entire floors. If something breaks plumbing, wiring, ventilation, you'll hear about it. A polite apology, a drink voucher, maybe an upgrade. But on our fourth night in the Alaskan Gulf, Deck 7 forward didn't just lose power. To vanish. Lights died. Elevators skipped the floor. Cabin doors sealed without explanation. By morning, passengers assigned to those rooms were gone, the crew said. Yet when they asked for luggage, passports, jewelry, photos, they were told the same phrase. No such cabins exist. And that's when whispers began about what had been swallowed in the dark. The announcement came softly, almost an afterthought. Guests on Deck 7 forward, please report to guest services for assistance with accommodations. Polite, harmless. But the people it affected didn't sound calm. At breakfast, I overheard them arguing with staff. My passport is in the safe, one man insisted. Sir, there is no safe, the agent replied. I put it there this morning, sir. That cabin isn't on our manifest. The word spread like smoke. Cabin isn't on our manifest. By lunch, the elevators no longer stopped on 7 forward. Buttons skipped from 6 to 8. The hallway on the deck plan was suddenly marked staff only. Passengers whispered, crew stonewalled. And by nightfall, the rumors began. Every ship has them, the amateur detectives. The restless on ours, it was the Doyle brothers. College kids with matching buzz cuts and a habit of drinking more bravado than beer. They swore they'd seen crew carrying suitcases out of 7 forward, cases that never resurfaced at Lost and Found. They whispered about voices behind the sealed doors. Someone's still in there, one told me, on Deck 6, eyes glittering with alcohol and excitement. You're imagining things, I said. He grinned. Then come with us tonight. I didn't, but later. I heard their story anyway. At 12:47 a.m., they slipped through a service door while a steward's cart blocked the view. The air inside was colder, they claimed. Not a sea cold, cellar cold, damp and old, the kind that clings to skin. The hall smelled faintly of brine. Not mold, not chemicals. Ocean. Every cabin door was open. Inside, the rooms were stripped bare, beds made without sheets, drawers yawning empty, closets without hangers. And then came the footprints. Water-darkened ovals marched across each carpet, leading from bathroom to bed, stopping mid, as if someone had stood there, dripping endlessly, staring. No luggage, no clothes, no people. Only silence broken by the slow tick of water dripping somewhere unseen. That's when the hallway lights snapped on. Security found them almost instantly. 2 uniformed men gripping their arms, dragging them back through the service door like misbehaving children. What were you doing? The older Doyle shouted. Looking for our friends, the younger said. The guard's voice was low and sharp. Don't wander here again. Do you understand? They were marched off and left with nothing but the warning. By morning, Deck 7 forward had changed again. Heavy chains now bound each door, padlocks gleaming under harsh white bulbs. Signs read, engineering access only. The brothers pointed, demanding answers. Crew ignored them. Other passengers snapped photos, only to find them missing later from their phones. One woman insisted her SD card had been wiped overnight. The ship itself seemed to conspire against memory. Elevators refused to recognize button 7. Maps and stairwells were quietly replaced. On the app, Deck 7 forward no longer existed, but those of us who had walked past it remembered. 3 days later, the chains vanished. The lights blazed bright. Crew guided guests back into the corridor with smiles. Maintenance complete, they chirped. Rooms ready for occupancy. The Doyle brothers tried to return, but the footprints they swore they'd seen were gone. Carpets scrubbed, Doors gleamed. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish. And the strangest part? The cabins were now full. Families checked in, kids dragging suitcases, parents fumbling with keycards. When the brothers compared the names to their notes, they found none matched. The passengers originally moved had vanished from the manifest. New names filled the slots, that it was as though the missing people had never existed. I spoke with a woman who had been forced off. Deck 7, the night it went dark. My cabin was 7,142, she said. I had jewelry in the safe. Photographs. My grandmother's locket. They promised to return them. I asked, they told me 7,142 doesn't exist. But you stayed there. She nodded, trembling. I can show you the keycard. She rummaged in her purse empty. The card she swore she'd kept was gone. Later, I checked the deck map. Cabin 7,142 was labeled storage closet. Every night after, people claimed to hear noises from 7 forward, water dripping, footsteps pacing, sometimes the muffled thud of a body against a wall. One man swore he woke to see the reflection of wet footprints outside his cabin door. Another said he saw faces behind the glass of the sealed portholes, pale, wide-eyed, lips parted as if gasping. The ship insisted it was nothing, but silence is its own kind of confession. On the final night, the brothers tried again. This time, they claimed the hallway was occupied not by guests, but by shadows. People-shaped figures stood in doorways, dripping seawater, staring. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood, as if waiting to be acknowledged. The brothers fled before security arrived. By distinction, they were quieter, less sure, but their eyes carried something the rest of us recognized. The look of people who had seen too much to ever sleep easily again. The ship's official report listed no incidents, no relocation, no complaints. Deck 7 forward was fully booked for the next cruise. But among passengers of our voyage, the whispers stayed alive. About missing names, about sealed doors, about dripping footprints that vanished when the lights returned, and about the truth no one wanted to say out loud. Deck 7 hadn't suffered a malfunction. It had fed